Here, Brian, and there are plans to expand
indoctrination.
That's right.
Well, Idahoans are also concerned.
Horror shot.
That line would be moving a little bit farther west.
I'm like crying.
Nobody wants to see
Dark money is influencing policy in our state.
Well, that's not how this works.
Well, hello there, and welcome to Nowhere to Hide. I'm Brian Hyde, and we're going to be talking today about it's a choice, not a handout. School choice is a hot button issue right now as the Idaho legislature is trying to approach different ways to solve some of the education challenges faced by the state. Now, it's very interesting that there is a one-size-fits-all mentality that originates from, well, the governor's office and through teachers' unions and through the state-run public education or school system, but there are also some alternatives that have been coming to the forefront. And right now, there are a lot of people in damage control mode trying the best they can to demonize and to terrorize and to portray this idea for competition as nothing more than this is a desire to destroy the public school system. Which kind of makes you stop and think, if the public school system is that sound, or if it's that much of a blessing to the public in general, how is it so fragile that the slightest bit of competition would destroy it? That's, I guess that remains to be seen. But nonetheless, here is the headline. This is from idahopress.com. Idaho senators prepare to introduce new school choice legislation. I want to point out here, because part of my job on Nowhere to Hide is to point out the subtle ways that media tries to manipulate opinion and tries to editorialize without being too obvious. It's subtle, it's crafty, but it's also sleazy. Look at those quotation marks. School choice. Is this because it's a direct quote from somebody? No, it's more of an implication that when we talk about school choice, we're talking about some imaginary thing. Like this is something about the Bermuda Triangle, right? You know, the disappearance of Bigfoot and company. And so there's this implication that it's not really real. But look at the lead for the story, and you really start to see it. The concept known as school choice, school freedom, both in quotation marks, or a huge danger to public schools, depending on who is asked. Can you see the difference in the way that these ideas are presented? School choice and school freedom, well, you know, so-called school choice, so-called school freedom, but the huge danger to public schools, hey, no quotation marks there. Why, everybody must see that. That must be self-evident. You'd arrive at that conclusion just walking down the street, right? It's one of this session's most hot-button issues. Yeah, do tell. We couldn't really tell by the editorializing just in the way this is written. Now, the article goes on to say lawmakers will be tasked with determining how to properly fund education and if public money can or should go to private institutions. Freshman Senator Brian Lenny of Nampa is among a group that will be introducing a new way to accomplish this through an education savings account that he said is not like previous attempts to further the idea of school choice. Notice they didn't put quotation marks around school choice in this particular paragraph. Interesting. Now, other groups, both lawmakers and outside advocates, are doing everything they can to stop public funds, that means taxpayer money, from flowing to private schools. Although I have to point out, private schools are not the only place that educational choice would allow those taxpayer dollars to be used. The group Reclaim Idaho has been staunchly against state money, by which they mean taxpayer money, going outside of public schools, by which they mean government-run schools, arguing that the state's public education system needs to be fully funded first. Okay, quick question here, just because this needs to be asked. What are they going to mean by fully funded? The cry of, oh, we need more money, we need more funding has been going on forever and ever. And it's not just true in Idaho. This is true in most other states as well. And yet, no matter how much money is put forth, and by the way, Idaho's public education establishment received a massive shot thanks to a budget surplus and a very generous wink, wink from Governor Little. Nevertheless, how much is enough? Is it ever going to be enough? It will never be fully funded. And so they will continue to say, well, until that's fully funded, we can't even talk about alternatives. But let's talk about, what are we getting for that money? Is it delivering on the kind of test results? Is it delivering on the kind of education that it should? Let's revisit that here in just a few moments. Luke Mayville, co-founder of Reclaim Idaho, says we're actively campaigning against any and all types of voucher legislation. Now, Luke likes to use that word voucher. Voucher, educational savings account, parts, the same thing. And someone on Twitter pointed out wisely, liver and kidney, they're the same thing, right, Luke? No, they're not. They may be similar, as in they're both organs found inside your body, but they have very different functions. Okay? The same thing can apply to educational savings accounts as well as vouchers. Vouchers, that is the scary buzzword. That must have been tested before, I don't know how many focus groups. What scares people the most? What do we say? Vouchers? Vouchers? Yes. Okay, vouchers. That's the thing we're going to go with. And here we are back to the quotation marks. Opponents to so-called school choice legislation say that education savings accounts are essentially the same as vouchers because they still result in public funding, by which they mean taxpayer funding, going toward private school tuition. But again, I want to point out, not only private school tuition. That's one possible alternative. There are many others, though. Now, Senator Lenny argues that voucher programs are distinct because the savings account has more applications than just the private school tuition. Thank you, Senator. That's what we needed to understand. He says a voucher is the government saying, here's a check for tuition, whereas an education savings account is, we're going to put money in here and you can use it for all of this stuff. So what it does is it allows you to completely customize your child's education, whereas a voucher doesn't do that. Now, Lenny said that the plan he and other senators are going to put forward will not cause the widespread issues that critics have warned of. They're proposing to create a state-run education savings account that any parent of a K through 12 student could opt into. Now, Superintendent Debbie Critchfield, was very careful to run for, I'm very much for school choice. She was absolutely on the side of school choice, and yet when she was questioned in a recent meeting at the state capitol, you might be surprised to find that she has changed her tune somewhat. She's much more in favor of let's keep it all inside the government-run school establishment. See for yourself.
I am not prepared to be an advocate for public funds going to private schools. That does not take away from a parent's ability to choose to send their child to a private school. And thinking earlier of Senator Den Hartog talking about the changes and the various ways that, I just lost my thought on that. I'm going to come back to that. We have a number of ways that we're able, I just got it back. Thank you. This is what happens at my age. We are able to satisfy a number of parental decisions through tax dollars. And her statement was, we've got a lot of existing programs in place that many times we keep trying to come up with another way to satisfy that, that same problem. And this is a topic where I think we do have a number of ways that we're able to identify that. Now, I may not be philosophically on the same place as someone else that all of the money would go. I have some things that are important to me: accountability, transparency. I think those are the expectations that we all have when it comes to the public realm. I think that should apply to the private as well. I personally have concerns anytime we allow the government to get more involved in our decisions. That looks a little bit differently. And as a taxpayer, I don't have expectations on some services that I don't use. I thankfully didn't have to use the fire department this year, but I'm not going to call the fire department and ask them to send me money for a service that I didn't use. And so there are things that again, I personally, philosophically, looking at the Constitution, what I was elected for, primarily, I want to improve public schools. I want public schools to be a school of choice. And I don't think any of those things limit the ability for a parent to send their child wherever they want to go. I know that was a long way around, but many points there.
Thank you. Any other questions today?
She's a pretty good tap dancer. I have to give her that. But the end result is she's giving the same answer that Henry Ford gave back when the Model T started rolling off the assembly lines. Sure, you can have any color you want, as long as it's black. I want our school choice to be within the public school system. And see, here's the key. There are parents who are looking for alternatives to the state-run system. Now, that doesn't mean that everybody does, and it doesn't mean we have to destroy that system to give people choice, but isn't it interesting? And it kind of makes you wonder who has offered what, or who has incentivized the superintendent to where she has backtracked and that we were warned. There were those who said she is not a proponent of school choice. She's just talking the talk to try to get her way into office. She talks about the need for accountability and transparency. Private businesses, including private schools, must have that accountability, must have that transparency, not just to government, but to the people who are actually using their product. Why? Because if they're not delivering on what they promise, people have the option of pulling out. Now, speaking of not delivering on what's been promised, Senator Lenny argues large increases in education spending over the past couple of years have not resulted in better outcomes. He says, if you look at public education as horse betting, we've been betting on the same horse over and over, and we've been making historic investments. If the return on investment isn't there, at some point we have to put a new horse in the race. And I do have to give credit to idahopress.com for including, this link as well as this note that data from the State Department of Education shows literacy and math scores did not reach 2022 targets. That's a very polite, mostly neutral way of saying they're not delivering on what was promised. So you can understand why parents may want to have some choices in the matter. Now, this is what Dustin Hurst pointed out. Here's what Brad, Debbie, Luke, and Julie Y ignore. If Idaho parents found government schools to be worthy, they wouldn't be searching for alternatives. But leftists ignore these voices all the times. Speaking of ignoring voices, you remember that raucous Caldwell school board meeting from a few days back? Well, look at this headline. Citing safety concerns, the Caldwell School Board won't be holding a hearing on their gender policy. This would be allowing students who identify as a gender other than what they were born to utilize restrooms, locker rooms, and so forth, whatever they feel like they are. The school told me the concerns were caused by the volume and content of emails board members have received. Safety concerns. Oh my goodness, where have we heard this before? This is kind of a standard ploy from people in power. When they get caught doing something wrong, suddenly it's, oh, well, now we're just concerned about the safety of people involved. By the way, even people who aren't in power. You remember last summer when there was the pushback against an all-ages drag show taking as part of the Boise Pride Festival? People were not they were not happy with the idea of kids being brought into a very hypersexualized environment. And so the all-ages drag show was canceled. Why? Well, citing safety concerns. It's meant to give the impression that, well, anybody who opposes this is so dangerous, they may just twist off and try to murder everybody involved. This is from idahonews.com. For now, the Caldwell School District does not have a plan to hold a public hearing on a proposed policy. Caldwell School District spokesperson Jessica Watts said no public hearing would be held on January 23rd after careful consideration and safety concerns. She said trustees are working with the Caldwell Police Department to create a plan to ensure the safety of all participants at all future meetings, or of participants at all future meetings. Now, are we talking physical safety, or are we talking about their mental and emotional safety? As in, these school board members don't want to be questioned. And they certainly don't want to be held to account by parents who are like, what the hell are you trying to force on me and on my children? Here's a tweet that followed this announcement that the board would have to address safety concerns. Pay attention, says the Idaho 97. This is how extremists break democracy. Oh boy. The attacks on the Caldwell School Board are unacceptable and are literally costing Caldwell kids and parents access to their elected officials. Think about the kind of country you want before you threaten a school trustee. Okay, what kind of threats are we talking about? Oh, we're going to vote you out. Gee, that's a little bit different than the kind of threat that maybe they're trying to imply here, right? We're going to vote you out. We will hold you accountable. We will take you out. We will separate you from the power that you hold right now. Oh, I can see where a bureaucrat would take that as, oh no, not that. But the implication that, well, now it's a safety concern, it's only a concern because these parents are not putting up with the kind of garbage that is being pushed on them. And of course, this is in true manner of tyrants and criminals and people who want to control others. When they get caught doing something that's ugly, what do? You act like a victim. Oh, this is not my fault. Everybody's just angry and I can't figure out why. Well, I can tell you a little bit why. It's because you're bringing really divisive, ugly policies forward and trying to force them on people as if, hey, this is totally normal. Is this no big deal? What do those policies look like? Okay, let's take a moment. Well, and again, just refresh your memory in case you've forgotten. The potential policy would allow students to use bathrooms and locker rooms aligning with their professed gender identity. So whatever they feel like that day, this is where I'm going to go. I feel like I should be in the girls' locker room, says the young man who 10 minutes ago was a young man, but now thinks he's a girl. Protect them from being denied participation in overnight trips due to their sexual orientation. Require district staff to use a student's preferred name and pronouns. By the way, that's not about being polite. That's about forcing other people. You must think of me in this certain way. You're being drafted into another person's fantasy. Protect students' privacy in regards to personal information, such as sexual orientation and legal name, as opposed to their dead name if they've been persuaded that maybe they're not really a boy or a girl. And protect the rights of same-sex couples to attend school activities, including dances, and prohibit general discrimination against those couples. Now, look, on the surface, that sounds very reasonable. Well, yes, of course, we just want to treat people with respect. This is the kind of policy, though, that is used to advance more and more pushing of the envelope, and let's push it just a little bit further. And again, this is built around a person's sexual preferences. I don't know how to put it any other way, but, kids are more than just a person, not just kids. Everybody is more than just whatever their sexual desires happen to be or their sexual attraction happens to be. When it comes to gender identity, I'm sorry. There are people who probably have a legitimate dysphoria or mental confusion in how they see themselves, much in the same way that anorexics look in the mirror and even though their skin and bones think, I'm too fat, I've got to lose weight. That's not grounds for condemnation, but neither is it grounds that, hey, everybody, we need to gather around and assure them, oh, you're right, because that's supportive and that's helping. It's not. And to me, the craziest thing about this is the denials that, oh, this is not being taught. There's no agenda to advance homosexuality or gender identity or, for that matter, critical race theory into our schools. And yet I want to show you a clip. This is from a Senate committee hearing that in which a teacher is being asked about some of the things that are taught by the Idaho Education Association, the teachers union, and whether or not some of those things regarding homosexuality, gender identity, and institutional racism are making their way into the classroom. Check this out.
We see subjects like this being taught to teachers. Does that mean that the actual content of the subjects, it's making its way back into our public school systems?
Mr. McAnally.
Mr. Chairman and Senator, I can only speak for myself. When I took classes, I took it to reflect on me as a professional educator and how it could help me grow as an educator. There are things that are taught to me that aren't necessarily going to be taught to students. It's to help me grow as an educator. And then there are things that I'm going to take directly back to my classroom and implement that very next day. So it varies across the state.
Now, God bless the people who actually do the homework and suss this out to determine, he didn't really want to answer that question, but there are those who are willing to do the homework and show you, no, this stuff is actually being taught and it's coming out in the classroom. And it's funny because there are not only there's teachers unions. Jim Jones is one of the spokespeople. Oh, there's no such thing as critical race theory. By the way, Project Veritas has a remarkable video of a guy whose job is to sell this curriculum, including critical race theory, to school districts. And he refers to himself as an evil salesman. Why? Because he says, oh, yeah, of course it contains critical race theory. We just don't call it that. And that's the same kind of loophole that Jones and others like him use to justify, well, we did a study and we looked to see if there was any critical race theory being taught anywhere, either on college campuses or in public school classrooms. We couldn't find a single example of it, because they looked under a very narrow definition that only would consider the possibility that it was being called critical race theory. But emotional social learning, guess what it teaches? Much the same thing. Now, kudos to the Idaho Freedom Foundation and its wonderful folks who get out there and do the hard work of, well, holding people accountable. And this is an article from Anna Miller, as well as Scott Yenner. Sorry, Scott. Didn't mean to butcher your name. The Idaho state constitution requires that the government establish a public school system, but there is no stipulation that it must resemble the current system, which is run by an intractable bureaucracy and a far-left teachers union. No matter how many so-called conservatives are in the state legislature, the public school bureaucracy remains as leftist as California. They push divisive racial doctrines, graphic and deviant sexual ideas, and socialist activism, all the while failing to educate children in the fundamentals. I know there are people who don't want to believe it, but I'm going to show you some evidence of this in just a moment. Private schools and homeschooling exist as options for families who can afford the time and money, but what about those who cannot? Now, Superintendent Critchfield and her bureaucratic friends believe that students who cannot afford superior options should be locked into a system that fails to educate and instead indoctrinates children with radical Marxist ideologies. Now, I know the popular press, the legacy press is like, oh, that's not happening. That's just a huge exaggeration. But I think any person who is honest with themselves can acknowledge, look, the envelope is being pushed. And the direction it's going is not, well, we should probably hold fast to traditional values of right and wrong. And, people, you should save yourself for marriage and that kind of stuff. In fact, I want to show you a bit of an excerpt of 8th grade students in Idaho being shown a video with simulated sex in a Planned Parenthood endorsed program. And this is being taught in the public schools to 8th graders.
Planned Parenthood endorsed sex education curriculum has infiltrated Idaho schools. In fact, Idaho's public health officials with the North Central Health District are encouraging middle schoolers to have sex. Now, after public records requests, we've discovered that 8th grade students in Moscow, Idaho's middle school have been shown graphic condom demonstrations. The video, produced by Trojan Condoms, is part of the Planned Parenthood endorsed sex education curriculum called Reducing the Risk. This video was part of the sex education program for several years, and it may have been shown to students in other schools in the district. Idaho law and standards allow only abstinence or until marriage sex education. These public health presentations, however, teach children that anal sex, oral sex, sexual fantasy, masturbation, and abortifacients such as Plan B are perfectly acceptable for middle schoolers. This is in total defiance of Idaho law. The curriculum also includes teaching young children about gender identity and transgender ideology. Out of the 120 PowerPoint slides, there's just one mention of marriage. 120 slides, one mention. Over a dozen mentions of anal or oral sex. Government employees are violating state law, and this Planned Parenthood endorsed curriculum is still being taught in at least 13 other schools. If you are a parent in Idaho, or just a concerned citizen, we need your help to continue to uncover what is going on in our schools. The future of our state depends on it.
Now, again, that was Anna Miller and Scott Yenner with the Center for American Education. I would highly recommend go to idahofreedom.org and you can read that article in its entirety. And, it's one thing how, people try to stampede us. The media particularly tries to stampede us in the direction of, well, this is all about destroying the public schools. But at some level, don't you have to wonder, why is it so essential? Why do we have to teach such deeply sexualized stuff to kids at such an early age? Why is that the new imperative? And for that matter, why have drag queens and so forth set their sights on, we've got to have access to the kids? My take on it, for what it's worth, and you may feel free to disagree with me, is that it's easier to train young minds when they're young and impressionable and very likely not to push back against even sometimes bizarre and deviant ideas being taught to them than it is to try to persuade adults that, no, this is really normal. This is good. This is absolutely, transgender Santa Claus is actually really kind of a cool thing. Get them while they're young. And it's not just about grooming them into being, little sexual deviants. It's about grooming them into being little left-wing activists. But it starts with breaking down their system of morals and divorcing them from anything that could provide stability in their lives, including family, including faith, and that knowledge that there are absolutes of right and wrong. So when you push back against this kind of thing, of course, this makes the people who are pushing such agendas pretty upset. They get nervous. They get angry. And of course, they start hurling words like bigot and so forth. But too many politicians have been co-opted. In fact, I want to show you just one more thought here. This was an editorial. I read this the other day and just went, wow, Chuck Malloy is really on one here. As Idaho GOP chairwoman slams Governor Little's priorities, fissure between GOP and elected officials grow. Now, the subheadline, it appears that Governor Brad Little will spend the next 4 years at war with the Idaho Republican Party, and we should have seen it coming. Chuck, welcome to reality, because the governor was never in the position of really being, in sync with the values of the Republican Party platform. He talks the talk and he's a good figurehead, and yes, he appeals to the right groups and the right lobbyists, but as much as he talks the talk, he governs as a left-winger. And that's what makes him so dear to the press. This is why the Democrats in the state legislature have all come out, oh, yes, we're absolutely 100% behind, Governor Little. We think he is doing a fantastic job. And why not? He's carrying the water for them while at the same time convincing a large number of voters in Idaho that, yeah, I'm your guy. Well, I don't think we really had a whole lot of a choice. I mean, Ammon Bundy picked up 17% of the vote, which is no slouch considering he was a grassroots candidate and a far shot, at best. But thank goodness you have people within the GOP who will stand up when they're elected officials, and that includes Scott Bedke as well. When they are departing from principles, they need to be called out and brought back in line. And if they aren't going to be brought back in line, they get shown the door, as did most of the GOP leadership this last year. Now, of course, this prompted the cries of extremism. It's taking over, and oh no, the extremists are trying to have their way with this great state of Idaho. But when they're talking about extremists, they're talking about normal people, average, everyday, normal people who simply understand what their rights are, who understand the difference between right and wrong, and who really aren't down with the idea of their kids becoming some kind of new sexual vanguard that's out there, paving the way to a brand new world where anything goes and reality is whatever you feel like at the moment. Those aren't the values that built this state. They aren't the values that built this country and our civilization. And frankly, when a society abandons those values, they're usually not going to be around much longer. They're in a state of decline. The best example you can look at for this is just look back to what the Weimar Republic looked like in Germany prior to the Third Reich coming into power. Anything goes. Debauchery was celebrated. I mean, come on, we're the smartest. There were more PhDs than in that country than any other country in the world at that time. Smart, educated people, just like the experts were telling us, this is what your kids need to hear. And where did it lead them? Once their sense of right and wrong was confused, once their moral compasses had been completely demagnetized, I don't know that we want to go there. Well, the solution doesn't start with top-down government or candidate or, elected official solutions. The solution, of course, always starts with people like you and me making a conscious choice to live as the best person that you can. That is really a revolutionary act. If you can just simply be a person of good, solid character, that doesn't mean you have to get up and make stump speeches everywhere you go. Just that people can look at you and see by your actions, by the kind of person you are, that you are not afraid to do the right thing, even and especially when it's the hard thing to do. You will attract opposition. You will be called names. You will be hated by those who look bad in comparison to you. But that's not your goal, right? Your goal isn't, well, look how bad I'm making them look. You're simply shining a light where it needs to be shown, and by example, showing people it can be done. Right and wrong can be exemplified through the way that we live our lives, and there should be no shame in that. I hope this sticks with you when it comes to not just school choice or other controversial issues that are before the legislature, but when you're assessing any information that's being presented to you, whether it's by me or whether it's by the legacy media, think about it in terms of what can I do to make sure that the lie doesn't prevail. And the best thing you can do is start by being honest with yourself and resolving not to live by the lie, by refusing to participate in the official lies, even if it costs you in terms of popularity or acceptance, or if you have to suffer a little bit for your beliefs. It's still the right thing to do, and more importantly, it makes the right kind of difference. I'm Brian Hyde, and this is Nowhere to Hide.
Are biased, the Idaho Press Club are biased, all media, newspaper, radio.
To be completely blunt here, Brian, and there are plans to expand
indoctrination.
That's right.
Well, Idahoans are also concerned.
Horror shot. That line would be moving a little bit farther west.
I'm like crying.
Nobody wants to see
Dark money is influencing policy in our state.
Well, that's not how this works.